Thank you for speaking with us. We just want to highlight women in cybersecurity for Women's History Month. So I appreciate you
that.
getting back to me.
My name is Danielle Meah. I am the Senior Manager of Threat Intelligence at Zoom. I've been in the role for about 2 months now. I've been at Zoom for about a year, and I'm currently based in the New York City area.
What were you doing before you were at Zoom?
Before I was at Zoom, I was the Director of Threat Intelligence for Trustworthy Accountability Group, which is a firm that basically tries to mitigate advertising fraud. So there's a lot of cyber threats in the fraud digital advertising space. So I was in charge of developing essentially a threat sharing network for digital advertising. And before that, I was the global head of threat intelligence at Citibank.
Wow. So yeah, that's very cool. How did you get started in cybersecurity? Was that something you were always interested in, or is it just kind of you fell into it?
Yeah, so I'd say I had a really long time ago, I had an internship with Congress that I got in the door based on my language skills. There's nothing cyber related, but while I was there, I was exposed to a lot of different cyber projects. Because the big controversy at the time was, how is cyber warfare differ from kinetic warfare? That was the project. So I got exposed to like the concept of threat intel and cyber, in geopolitics. And it just piqued my interest. So I decided I was going to try and pursue a more serious career in it at that time.
Yeah, and you clearly succeeded. What did you study in college? Like, what were you planning to do before you kind of got here?
So I studied Chinese language and world politics. So I had no concept of what I was planning to do. Originally, I wanted to be an author, which is completely different deviation from where I am now. But I did want to use my language skills, and I was determined to incorporate that in my day-to-day if I could somehow, because I just love learning languages, and it was an important time in my life.
What was your first career? How did you, I was like, what was
Yeah, so after the internship, I went into, I was applying to a bunch of different jobs, and I had the opportunity to join basically a cyber threat intelligence vendor because they needed a Chinese linguist. And I was put on a bunch of different profiles. So I had a portfolio of different industries, and those industry clients wanted to build threat intelligence teams as part of the organization. And we were there as kind of a consultant vendor almost, doing both global and like physical global security and cybersecurity. And I was working on the cybersecurity side and got exposed to a bunch of different ways that orgs actually approach the problem of security. And that's kind of what piqued my interest in getting more technical. Since I was there, I realized I have no technical skill set whatsoever. I can't really be that effective in this role without knowing more about the landscape. So that's kind of what kicked off the career.
How did you learn everything? Because I was also new to cyber when I first joined SCV. So what did you do to kind of read up and get knowledgeable on everything in the industry?
Yeah, I pursued a higher degree. So I went for a graduate degree in digital forensics, just to understand the computer itself, honestly, how you understand, file changes, evidence identification, things like that. And then I just read everything that I could, and I was asking a lot of questions and trying to get trained by people who were much more knowledgeable than me on those subjects. But I've been exposed to a lot of, different cyber teams, like different dynamics. So, cyber threat intel is one kind of small silo of the overall program anywhere. So I always make a priority of understanding what the other programs are doing, and that's exposed me to a lot of different technical skill sets.
So if someone is trying to get into cyber and learn more, what kind of books or podcasts or things would you recommend that they start with?
I think everyone's always going to recommend the SANS courses, just to get your, to understand kind of your discipline area. It's really good for you doing a deep dive on, I think, what you're planning to go into as a career or how you want to apply that skill set to your career. But honestly, I think talking to and networking, honestly, with cyber professionals is the most direct, efficient way to go. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people who were willing to just have conversations with me about what they found, what they were passionate about and how they do their work. And I learned much, much more that way, just shadowing those individuals. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Is threat intelligence, you've dabbled in a bit of different aspects of cybersecurity. So what do you think is the most interesting component of that so far?
I think it has to be threat intel. I think that's what I've been doing for so long. And I enjoy that problem. It's a really complex problem. I think a lot of orgs understand the value of intel. They don't necessarily know how to apply it in a meaningful way. So actually actioning the intel that you get and making sure that other teams understand it and use it in a meaningful way is really complicated in many instances, but I enjoy that problem. So that's where I focus on for now. I think there tends to be an overemphasis on like technical and technology solving problems that humans can really only solve. And I think the emphasis on using tools to identify threats is one area of that, but I also think just relying on this technology to perform like analyst assessments and to be doing the work on behalf of teams is the wrong direction to be going in. I think people are a critical resource for any good cyber program. So I would advocate for anyone who's running a program or hiring for a program to really spend a lot of time invested in developing your staff, making sure they're not burnt out, their skill sets are being enhanced, they are happy and motivated to be there. Because I've seen instances where burnt out cyber teams aren't necessarily just not effective, they're actually a negative to the organization in terms of security posture. So it's really important. It's something that I'm passionate about, is making sure that people feel like they're being invested in as part of this industry.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for any industry, especially these days. People definitely need to feel like they're an asset and have a chance to take a break and reset. Very important.
Yep.
Have you been able to do that?
I hope so. I don't know the degree of effectiveness I've been able to do it towards, but I think, I do spend a lot of time thinking about my team. And I think a lot of people don't really understand what like the orchestration of cyber is meant to do in an organization. I'm not saying that in a disparaging way, but it tends to be a very siloed industry. If you're very good at one thing, you don't tend to branch out into doing another type of discipline. But unfortunately, all those disciplines work together in an organization to protect the org. So you need to be able to speak the language of many different people, many different teams, many different skill sets. So I spend time thinking about how I can help my team do that. And for the most part, I've had a good track record. So I don't think every manager has, I think, people that they, probably disagree with, but I've had the good fortune of having teams that I think are really, really motivated, really positive, really skilled, just like some of the most brilliant people I've ever met. So I hope so.
Throughout your career, do you have any defining or memorable moments that you're particularly proud of?
That's a good question. I've had a lot of different exposure, I think, I've been able to travel a lot. So I've been exposed to different organizations globally. And I think I've been fortunate to have conversations with executives about their programs and how they approach the problem of security, how they approach cyber. That's been immensely valuable just as a learning opportunity. So I think back fondly on that, but everyone I've met in this field has been super interesting. And I've learned a lot from them. I've maintained some good relationships and good friendships from that. So that's probably the most memorable.
Yeah. Have you had one person in particular who's been a mentor for you throughout all of this?
Yeah, I have had a mentor. I've had a few different mentors. There's one individual who, I won't embarrass this person, but he basically coached me throughout my career, got me started, helped me understand how to be more effective in a cyber role within an organization, and advocated for me for a really, really long time. So I owe a lot of my career success to him.
So for someone who's looking to get started and doesn't have a mentor, what kind of advice would you pass along from your mentor to them?
I would say having the skill set to kind of back up what you're able to talk about. I think a lot of people go in with strong understanding and they can articulate the concepts well about problems in cybersecurity and how to solve them. But if you actually do the research and have the understanding of how to apply that skill into your role, which isn't always obvious, it's not a seamless connection all the time. For example, like going into threat intelligence, I understood a lot about intel, the discipline. I didn't understand a lot about how it's used in an organization and why it might be useful for decision making or impacts on cost, impacts to business. So making those connections is really important. And that usually only comes from people who have been in the space for a long time and understand the dynamics of that org. I'd also say, don't be afraid to apply to things because they can be very intimidating, the job descriptions, but people bring skill sets to the roles that aren't necessarily what the hiring manager had in mind, but are infinitely more useful. And a lot of they focus on technical skills, obviously, because it's the cyberspace, but technical skills are important. They're not the only thing that gets you in the door. They're also not the only thing that you can leverage in your role. So I would draw on your entire, your tool bucket in those interviews to help describe how you might leverage your own skill set and your diverse experience into your role.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice for women in general, because I feel like women typically are like, oh, I'm not qualified for this, I'm just gonna let it go. But on the other hand, men are like, I'm not really qualified this, but whatever, I'm gonna apply for it. So
yeah, in my experience, women tend to be really good at operations and detail orientation, which are kind of polar opposites of the spectrum, but when together in a cyber role are incredibly effective. If you have an incident, for example, and someone's running the incident, usually a woman is keeping track of all of the different moving parts in a way that nobody else has had insight into. So, I mean, not to disparage anybody, but I do think the different genders bring different skill sets to the role. So I would encourage women in these types of interviews, and especially like they're starting out in their career, make use of what you think you're good at. You don't have to completely change your skill set just to feel like you're going to fit into the org or to the role. And if you're good at, operations, use that in whatever you're doing.
Is there any women in tech or any role models in general that you look up to?
Question.
It's hard.
I don't know. I have a lot of different people that I look up to. I don't know that I can single any person out. I think, honestly, the women who are juggling a personal life on top of having a full high-powered career have always been someone that's inspirational to me, just because it's difficult to understand how you can do both in such a high octane pace. The roles are very demanding in cyber. In my experience, I've been doing 24/7, 7 days a week. I was doing that for years before I actually got to a point where I didn't have to be online at 10 p.m. at night. But that's untenable for a lot of folks. And I know that a lot of people who are experts in the field, and the women have kind of risen the ranks to oversee these programs and, develop the cyber entities, especially at a Fortune 100 company. They've had to go through a lot to get to that point. So I respect that. It's really hard work. It's a lot of probably challenges, opposition, I'm guessing, plus balancing a family. It's incredibly difficult. So.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Massive respect to all the women and men who also have families. It's 2022.
It can be really tricky. I think it is a male-dominated space, right? And I think that has definite advantages in some areas. For women trying to enter the space, it's a barrier in many instances that I've had the unfortunate experience of observing. So I think just understanding that you are not, you are not your job, which is difficult because I think a lot of women throw themselves full gusto into their roles, especially when they want to prove themselves, they want to feel like they're making a contribution. And being able to kind of take a step back and say, this is who I am. I'm not going to let the role, the org, the cyberness of it get the best of me. And I can still have a life, right? Which is, honestly, it sounds so simple, but it's a really difficult thing in this field to actually achieve. So
yeah. Do you think the pandemic has helped at all with that? Because
no.
I feel like, no, you don't think so?
Not whatsoever. I think everyone being online now and is an expectation almost. At least Zoom is really good about that. Honestly, Zoom has a fantastic culture about work-life balance. But in my experience, if there's an event, there's a crisis, there's an incident happening, you're there, you're responding, you're online. So the pandemic hasn't really helped this space that much, unfortunately. I think other industries, maybe not cyber.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I feel like there's been more cyber attacks now that everyone's working from home without the security of their offices. Do you think that's part of it, or?
I think to an extent, right? I think it's more just the expectation that something's happening all the time. Like there's no commute anymore. You're here, you sign on, you walk your computer, you sign on. The end of the day is so much later than what originally it was thought to be, because you can leave an office physically, you can go to your car, you can go on the train, and think about that break between work and home. There is no break now. And especially with cyber, it being a 24-hour operation most of the time, you're kind of expected to be on point more often than I think I was before when it was not a fully remote position.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So when you do have free time, what do you like to do?
I don't have a ton of free time because I have a 2-year-old, but okay. I do enjoy taking him places and just kind of watching him experience the world. Love travel. Like prior to COVID, we were traveling a lot of different places. Coffee is a hobby. That's definitely a big one.
Making or
Sure.
drinking?
Drinking it. I'm such a coffee snob. I don't know if that's a hobby, but it takes up a lot of time.
What's your go-to order or type of coffee?
Cappuccino. I have a million different gadgets to make coffee here at my house. So I just like to experiment, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good skill. I feel like I just drink cheap diner coffee, but a cappuccino sounds way better than that.
A lot of time thinking about this, so it's almost embarrassing, but yeah.
In an alternate world, if you weren't in cybersecurity, I know you have your language background, but if you didn't end up in cyber, what would you think you'd be doing with your Chinese language background?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I always had the inkling that maybe I wanted to be in the foreign service. And I don't know that I would ever pursue that seriously. But when I was starting out, like, that was the intention, with the language skills. But honestly, I'm super grateful for the career I've had. I don't really think much about an alternative dimension because I've been very fortunate, right? I think a lot of people struggle to make headway in a career, especially when they're breaking into it. But I've had the good fortune of having great people around me, of having, a direction, like supportive organizations, and opportunities that have been given to me just for these incredible roles. So I don't think about that too much.
That's great because I mean, yeah, there's the multiverse. I mean, there might be, but we can't go back. So that's great.
Yeah.